Back at it again with topics that I personally thought we would never talk about here on this YouTube channel. Because yes, it's true, we've made a bunch of videos on Lane Hutson over the past few years, ever since his draft selection at the hands of the Montreal Canadiens in 2022. We've made a bunch of videos talking about this guy, hyping him up as a prospect, as an NCAA talent, and then inevitably as a Canadian. Last year, there was so much excitement heading into Lane Hutson's rookie year, and I think I speak for every Habs fan on the planet when I say that expectations for this guy now are higher than ever. Lane Hutson, everybody, is a borderline franchise-defining defenseman to be for the Montreal Canadiens, and I don't think that's too hot of a take. You can talk about labels and semantics, elite, franchise, generational. Okay, the guy's not generational, but Lane Hutson is a guy whose profile fits the mold of a franchise-defining talent for Montreal, and heading into the long-term future, if this guy's able to produce minimum 66 points a year, which I think that's a very low bar, but if he's able to do that, I think a lot of folks would say, yeah, this guy's a really legit player. So, long-term, it's like, what if he hits 70? What if he hits 80? What if he hits 85 or 90? This guy will be the face of Montreal defending for years and years to come. But what if I told you that this guy would not have been a Montreal Canadien if not for this guy? Today, we are taking a blast to the past and talking about one of the most beloved turtleneck-wearing Habs of yesteryear, Tomas Plekanec! Yeah, I had to, the moment I said Tomas, I was like, oh, do I do it? Do I do it? Do I do it? No, I can't say Tatar! Today we're talking about Tomas Plekanec. He is now 42 years old, folks. That's I don't want to go out there and say anything, but it is kind of old. Plekanec is so old that the last season he had played in Montreal, 18-19, where he had 3 games played and 1 point, this was right around the time that I started making videos about the Canadiens full-time. It was around the 2018 draft period, and then, of course, Plekanec left the Habs organization. He went back over to Czechia, and then he had a nice end to his career over there. But Tomas Plekanec played all of his career, spare a very brief stint, with the Montreal Canadiens. He was drafted by the Habs in 2001, and then played the next few years in Montreal, maxing out at 70 points in 82 games played in 2009-2010. Plekanec was a beast, and I don't think anybody's going to go out there and disrespect him for the work he has put in. But in 2017-18, you'll note the only time Plekanec strayed away from Montreal, where he got traded over to the Toronto Maple Leafs and played 17 games in the regular season, scoring 2 points. He also had 4 points in 7 games in the playoffs that year, when the Maple Leafs lost to, was it Boston? Yeah, it might have been Boston. Might have been somebody else, I'm not too sure, but still, Tomas Plekanec had himself a very good career in Montreal and a very brief stint with Toronto. What if I told you that the trade which sent Plekanec to the Maple Leafs resulted in Lane Hutson? Here's an article posted on HabsFanatics.com by Elias Edmondson. It was published yesterday. I'm going to leave a link in the description to go out there and read this yourself. But this article is great because it features an Instagram post made by Habs Territory and James Miller Hockey. We're not going to go on to Instagram itself to look at the thing, but it's right here in the article. Here's the crazy trade tree. Tomas Plekanec to Lane Hutson. Let's just go slide by slide and read each of the updates here as they go down, and then dive into the full analysis as posted on top over here. Take a look at this. The trade tree on February 25, 2018. The Toronto Maple Leafs acquired Tomas Plekanec and Kyle Baun from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for a 2018 Toronto second-round pick, where Jacob Olofsson was the prospect, Renat Valiev, who is the important player in this transaction, and Kirby Reichel, who was then traded over to Calgary. Here's the next trade in the trade tree. On October 1st, 2018, Rinat Valiev and Matt Taormina were sent over to the Calgary Flames in exchange for Brett Kulak. And, somebody must have been smoking something in 2018 when this trade was made, because Brett Kulak, are you kidding me? He went for Valiev and that? Oh my gosh, I can't go out there and believe it, man. I can't. So February 25, 2018, October 1st, 2018, then we have ourselves a trade 4 years later, where Brett Kulak is sent over to Edmonton for William Lagesson, who became a free agent and went to Carolina, a 2022 Edmonton second-round pick, and a 2024 Edmonton seventh-round pick, which was used to select Rasmus Bergqvist. The 2022 Edmonton second is the important part of the deal, because that pick became Lane Hutson. Goodness gracious, man. Who would have thought that a rental nothing trade for Tomas Plekanec back in 2018 would inevitably result in the Canadiens getting the best defenseman they've had in years 7 years later in Lane Hutson. Okay, 4 years later, but he didn't play until a few years after. Lane Hutson is a monster. And you're telling me that the legacy of Tomas Plekanec is ultimately the reason this guy became a Hab? That's crazy. We could dive into all the other assets here, Valiev and Reichel and Taormina and all that stuff, but really, I think a lot of folks remember the Kulak trade. The Kulak trade was just 3 years ago after all, and a lot of folks would bring up that really interesting trivia fact that, oh yeah, Kulak was traded for a second-round pick, and then just a few months later, that same second was used to select Lane Hutson, which is great. You know, we love seeing immediate returns on defensemen the Canadiens trade away. But Kulak's trade tree goes up quite far, and Tomas Plekanec and his draft opportunity at the hands of the Canadiens in 2001 ultimately formed what is the tree which we see nowadays with Lane Hutson and with his overall dominance in Montreal. Let's go out there and look at the trade tree in question over here. 1, the Canadiens traded Plekanec to the Maple Leafs in exchange for Reichel, Valiev, and a second. That second was then sent, Valiev was then sent over to Calgary for Kulak. The Canadiens traded Kulak to Edmonton for a second, and then that second round pick became Lane Hutson. It is a very, very interesting trade tree, and one of these situations where when you just dive into the what happened afters, this is where you talk about the crazy hypotheticals of how everything comes to be. Because you needed everything to go right. This is like Doctor Strange in the multiverse over here, looking at all the possibilities. He sees one outcome where the Canadiens get Lane Hutson, and it's this one. The Habs needed to make this trade with this guy, with this team, to get this player, to send him over to Calgary for that player, and then send that player over to Edmonton for this draft pick, and then use that draft pick to draft that guy. Pronouns, man. So many pronouns in that. But with all this in mind, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Tomas Plekanec's memory and legacy in Montreal living on in the form of Lane Hutson? 4 Canadian teams, multiple trades going down, and the Habs ultimately get their prize at the end. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.